I'm Ben Sotak. I'm a New York-based horror filmmaker.
Ben Sotak is, like he said, a horror filmmaker. He's worked on various films such as Call of the Wendigo, Scavenger, Cryptid's Mordeo, and Who's Afraid of the Octopus Man?
I have a love of monsters. I have a love of mythology and urban legends, and I like shooting my projects with a very sort of cinematic lens, almost like let's shoot this like a drama rather than a quote unquote kind of goofy horror movie, and sort of showcase the beauty of these monsters and treat them almost like real tactile things.
From all the projects that you've worked on in the past, what has been your favorite moment or experience that you've had while shooting on set?
That's a great question. I can probably think of like one great moment per project. Some just like nice, happy accident, the film gods shining down on you stuff. I did like a Kraken spec commercial a few years back that we were shooting at this abandoned beach in Brooklyn called Dead Horse Bay. And the drive to the shoot, it was like small, scrappy crew. We had permits, but it was just a couple of our friends just out of film school. The drive to the shoot, I was like in full panic mode because it was just like downpour rain, like thunder and lightning like hitting the water. I just like my anxiety comes out in whenever I'm doing a shoot in like very like unrealistic ways. I'm like, well, what if like lightning hits the camera and then like the camera melts and then like somebody dies and gets like swept away? I always have these like weird anxiety attacks about like not actual like problems that are going to happen. I've like shot things in like woods where there are like mountain lions. I'm like, what if a mountain lion like eats my actors? Like that's where it pops up. So the whole time driving up to that, I was like, what if there's like no beach to like shoot on? What if like something like horrible happens and like the camera gets swept away or a crew member gets swept away? And we pulled up to shoot, and like the second I like opened my car door, it like stopped raining. Like instantly, like film gods smiling down on you, like it stopped raining. And we had just this like perfect, nice overcast gloominess for the entire shoot, and every shot, perfect because we had just like natural diffusion. We didn't have any like bounce boards or anything. Just like the rest of the shoot was so wonderful and smooth sailing after that. And it was one of those ones that kind of taught me like, all right, you can kind of like quell that anxiety a little bit. Like if it's a problem, you can deal with it in real time, but like the sort of build up to it, you don't need to stress yourself out more than you're already being stressed out. So that was a big one for me.
So you guys shot on an abandoned beach?
Yes. I have a thing for like ominous sounding locations. So that one was called Dead Horse Bay. It's in Brooklyn, and it's this abandoned beach. I'll send you a link to the spec once we wrap up, but it's this beach that's like covered in broken glass and little baby doll heads. Apparently like in the 50s, a baby doll factory exploded off the shore, and like now you just like wash up these like creepy little baby doll heads on the beach. It's really beautiful and really like disgusting. But like as far as a location goes, I kind of hope they never clean it up because it's so cinematic and creepy. It looks like something out of an H.P. Lovecraft story. So that was Dead Horse Bay, and where we shot the original Mordeo short is called Devil's Den. It's I guess a nature preserve up in Connecticut, and the legend is that there's like a rock somewhere in the preserve that has like a devil's like hoof print embedded in it. So it was kind of the perfect place to shoot.
Oh wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So that kind of leads to my next question. Out of all the locations you've filmed so far, which one has been your favorite?
It would probably be a tie between the two I just laid out. Devil's Den we just shot there like another, similar thing where like the film gods were shining down on us. It was just like the perfect time of year. It wasn't like freezing cold, but we still had those like bare Sylvan, the witch looking trees that are just like really sharp and foreboding. So we loved shooting there. And then, Dead Horse Bay, as much as I was like nervous driving up to it, that it was going to be a disaster, that somebody was going to like step on a piece of broken glass or a rusty nail and have to get a tetanus shot. It ended up being just like a beautiful location. And I kind of want to go back and just like explore it a little bit. The Mordeo series that we did with Cryptid after that, we shot at a Girl Scout camp in New Jersey, and just kind of like it was off season for them because it was in the fall, so we just kind of had like full reign of like cabins and windy roads through the woods, and they were just like, yeah, you pay your fee and you can go shoot anywhere on this like huge property. So that was dope. And then it's funny, like I live in New York City. I've only shot like, and I've been here for 10 years, including film school, but I've only shot like one project in New York City. Everything else, I'm like, all right, let's get like out of the city, back to the woods, kind of like where I grew up. But the post-apocalyptic short that you mentioned, Scavenger, we shot that in my home state, or the state I grew up in Maryland. And that was really cool, just like driving around to all these abandoned locations. My partner, who plays the lead and scored the thing, would just be like, wait, I see like an abandoned barn over here, like let's pull over and like check it out. And we'd go and like take some photos, and then a few weeks later we'd go and shoot stuff. So like driving around and just using all these like free abandoned locations for Scavenger was another great location highlight.
What has been the most like difficult shoot that you've had?
Most difficult? That's a good question. I mean, they all pose like weird challenges. I would probably say, just from like a physical stamina standpoint, the Call of the Wendigo short that I co-directed with my DP and good friend Stephen Russell, that was probably the most like physically taxing one, because I was in front of the camera, which will never happen again. It's like a fun little experiment and exercise in putting myself in the actor's shoes. But we were shooting, again, we were driving around, so that we shot that in Colorado where he grew up. It was kind of this like nice transition time where he was there for like the holidays, and I, had some time off from work. He was like, you want to like come out and like hike around? And we were like, yeah. And then he was like, do you want to like shoot something while we're here? And I was like, yeah, we've got, this amount of resources. It's basically like just the two of us. We're both, in addition to being huge horror fans, just like huge fans of the Western genre and just huge fans of cinematic, pretty looking films in general. So we're like, well, what if we just kind of use this as an opportunity to try out some shots that we've always wanted to try, stuff that looks a little bit more plucked from like Assassination of Jesse James, The Revenant. But of course, because it's me, I was like, yeah, that would be dope. What if there's a Wendigo in it? So it was literally just the two of us, him doing everything behind the camera, physically moving the camera around in the snow, and me doing everything in front of the camera, like my own costuming, my makeup, and attempting to act. We had a great time, and it was like such an adventure, but it was cold as shit. And it's a similar deal, like that one we didn't pay for any locations. A lot of that was just like driving around to these, locations and finding like, all right, this is a cool looking tree. It looks kind of like something out of True Grit. Go like walk up to it and like spit out some blood, and we'll figure out how it fits into the story. And it literally, like, there are moments like the kind of like cliff that I'm on. Mm-hmm. We had to put the camera on a sort of hi-hat on like baby legs. So it was like, close enough here. And it was literally just like perched on the edge of the cliff. And he had to go like grab something, and there was no other like crew. So he's like, you need to like hold this and not let it fall off the mountain. And I'm like fully in costume, like spitting out blood, dressed like a fucking stupid cowboy, and just like shivering and holding this. And on top of that, I'm like afraid of heights. So I was just like trying not to like look down over the ledge and drop his very expensive Red camera into the fucking canyon. So that one, and then we were shooting that portion where like, the kind of like transformation happens and the wind blows through. And at first we were like really cold, really irritable, really just like at each other's throats, like just kind of like getting it done. And then like as it went on, we started to like feel really good, and we were kind of like goofy, kind of joking around. We're like, it's actually not that cold. By the time we wrapped, there was this blizzard coming through, and we were driving home, and also similar, kind of like punchy, kind of like that was fun, like whatever. We kind of realized we were feeling that sort of like joyous, jubilant, because we were starting to be hypothermic. And like I didn't like say anything when we were driving down, but like my toes were like I couldn't feel or move them for like 2 days after. Luckily, his dad is a doctor and was like, they're probably not frostbitten, but they're definitely numb. And he suspected we were shooting in like a negative 10 degree weather.
Oh, jeez.
Which is, again, I wouldn't recommend, but it was a good time. And like, fortunately, the camera didn't fall off the cliff. I didn't fall off the cliff. I love the cryptid space. I love all sort of like mythology and lore, and it's interesting. And I'd be curious to ask you. You know, we've obviously talked about the Wendigo quite a bit because that's the focus of a few of my shorts. But I wonder if you consider the Wendigo itself a cryptid, and if your definition of the cryptid, as I understand it, it's an animal sometimes defined as a monster, but it's really like an animal that hasn't been acknowledged by the scientific community. But there are a number of reported sightings. Obviously, there are a lot of animal characteristics to mine and many depictions of the Wendigo, but with it technically being a supernatural spirit, do you consider it a proper cryptid?
I'm not 100% sure on what I believe. I think that if it did exist, if the antlered version exists, I feel like that is more of a cryptid than the spirit. And the spirit would fall more under like paranormal ghost type of thing. But then in my last interview, we counted the headless horseman as a cryptid.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
So I think the word cryptid can be up for interpretation between people. In my personal opinion, I think the antlers type, that is more cryptid than the supernatural type. Yeah.
I think my first exposure to the idea of the creature and just like the name itself was in the infamous Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. There's a very like boiled down version of Algernon Blackwood's The Wendigo, where there isn't necessarily a creature component. It's about like hunters up in, northern Ontario. And I just remember the artwork of like, bloody footprints leading through the snow. And obviously the artwork from that is terrifying and traumatized a ton of generations. But yeah, there's, in that story and then in Blackwood's novella that it's based on, you never actually see a creature. There's sort of like, there's these woodsmen who are like off and hunting, and one of them wanders off into the woods and they, start to hear his voice, but then they start to question, like, is that actually him? Is this sort of a skinwalker imitating him? And I think there's some, there's a scene where the guy's following what he believes is this missing guy's footprints, and he starts to see like another set of footprints, but they're not human feet, they're like hoofed feet, but that's all you sort of get as far as like an animal depiction. So again, it's a very cool and very malleable mythology. But I like, regardless, this sort of implication, whether it's through narrative storytelling or, pseudo documentary storytelling, just sort of like expanding the mind a little bit and being like, just because this thing hasn't been reported on, just because you didn't read about it in a biology textbook, doesn't mean it's not real. I think cryptids and monsters and urban legends in general are just sort of a testament to the sort of human ingenuity and the ways we kind of like rationalize and make our world work for ourselves.
And I find that like what you're doing is just passing on these stories, and that's amazing.
Totally. I appreciate that, man. I mean, it's cool to see this thing that originated in Algonquin lore, kind of like take on a new form and a new shape, much the way that like some of our favorite non-cryptid, just straight up monsters, werewolves and vampires, every culture has their own sort of interpretation of those, and it all stems from one place, but you pass it to one culture and they add an antler, you pass it to another and they add a heart of ice, they add the cannibalism component, and what you're left with is just like a very rich shared lore.
The main question of the show, obviously we've talked about the Wendigo a lot. What is your favorite cryptid and why?
Favorite cryptid, I love the Wendigo. If we're considering her to be a cryptid. I lived for a little while as a kid in the Caribbean, and so I'm like kind of drawn to like whatever the like cryptids of where I'm living and growing up are. So like the Kraken was a big one, obviously, because we were right by the water, and anytime there was like a huge storm, we would make up stories about there being Krakens out there like taking down ships. I love the origin story of like how that came to be, pieces of like a giant squid washing up on the beach after fighting with a sperm whale or something, and people seeing those and like seeing those individual chunks and being like, well, this must have come from some just like a monstrous creature, and it must be responsible for felling these ships. Another one that originated from there was the cow-footed woman, the goat-legged woman. Have you heard that one?
I have not.
It's this one, it sounds so goofy and her name is so goofy, but I heard it at like such a formative age, maybe like 5 years old, that it really, really stuck with me. It's a story as it was told to me, and it's kind of like a Caribbean legend, but there was a storm going on. There was a mother living with her daughter in a shack on the beach in the midst of a hurricane, and she heard a knock at the door. She opens the door and there's this beautiful young woman, and she invites her in, obviously, because there's a storm going on outside. And as she kind of steps into the house, with one of her feet is making this like heavy thud on the hardwood floors, and there's like some tea boiling in the other room. So she like leaves the woman alone with her baby for a second and goes into the other room, and then comes back in, and the door is open and the baby is gone. And on the beach, there's a set of footprints. One of them is a human woman's footprint. The other is a cow-footed footprint. And for whatever reason, and so she took the baby, disappeared into the storm. For whatever reason, that one always chilled me. And I went back and kind of investigated a little bit. And like, it's such a combination of sort of like Caribbean folklore mixed with the sort of colonial Dutch folklore of a diabless, like a woman who has like, a goat's body, or like is like a seductress and like almost like a succubus. So I always really enjoyed that one, and I don't know if it's gotten enough like love or a sort of respectful depiction, but I always thought that one was cool.
And I like how you say you're like, I know that's a strange one. There's so many strange cryptids. Like I was just, whenever you said that, I was thinking, well, you got the squonk.
What's the squonk?
Imagine a pig that is very wrinkly and constantly crying, and that's all a squonk is. Yeah. There's
probably kind of cute.
I looked it up. I tried to like go into it because I was gonna do an episode on it, but then I was like, there's not much lore to go off of, because it's labeled as a cryptid, but the only like description of it is, it's this wrinkly pig that cries all the time. I'm like, I can't really go off of that too much.
There's not a lot of squonk content.
No, there needs to be more squonk.
Yeah,
content.
Maybe I'll do a squonk movie next.
That would be great.
Find a way to make the squonk really scary.
So that's the challenge. Try to make the squonk scary.
Scary, but also cinematic and respectfully depicted. I'm up for the challenge.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, thank you for talking with me today.
My pleasure, Carter. I think it's cool what you're doing and spreading the good word about cryptids. Like I said, it's always cool to hear and just sort of muse upon like whether or not our world is bigger and stranger than we've been told or taught. So I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. Well, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too, man.